Immigrants for Change, where our topic today is immigrant rights or human rights, movements for immigrant justice. For those who don't know or would just like to be reminded, Kiyoshi Kuromiya was an AIDS activist. He was also a civil rights activist. He was also a gay activist. He was an activist in getting people access to the internet and many other areas where I could probably go on for quite some time. But we started doing this on the 10th anniversary of Kiyoshi's death, and we continue to do it because this program is a way for us to reaffirm, fight, and many of the people who are active in AIDS our rootedness in activism. And also to remind all of us that AIDS is not an isolated topic, and that until we address the numerous social justice issues whose our society's failure to address has made people vulnerable to HIV, we're not going to end this epidemic. So each year we take an issue, or sometimes two issues, in which Kiyoshi had an interest and put together a program. This year we have a really fantastic panel, which I will leave to Peter to specifically introduce, but I want to thank all of you for being willing to take the time out and come to this program. Can we just thank them? And now I'm going to introduce our moderator, Peter Gonzalez, who is the president and CEO of the Welcoming Center for New Pennsylvanians, which is a private nonprofit organization providing education, training, job placement, and small business development support to immigrants in the Philadelphia region. For the past 20 years, he has been connecting others to opportunities, serving as an educator, advocate, and community development professional in the United States, Poland, and South Korea. As an immigration attorney, he's represented a wide range of clients, from professionals in the healthcare and technology sectors to construction, agricultural workers, as well as families and individuals seeking visas, lawful permanent residence, and citizenship in the United States. Peter has been actively involved with the American Immigration Lawyers Association and has lectured at numerous conferences and events in the United States on immigration matters. He currently serves on the board of directors of the St. Christopher's Foundation for Children and the Merchants Fund. So please welcome Peter Gonzalez.
Thank you very much, Jane. Are the microphones on?
They are.
Okay. So I thought we'd take the opportunity, since everybody came out on what is a very hot, steamy day, to join this group in this room today, to take the time to think back to when we were young. I came across some information about Kiyoshi Kuromiya. How do I pronounce his last name? Kuromiya. And one of his mentors was Buckminster Fuller. Just by a show of hands, does anybody know who Buckminster Fuller is at? Okay. I sort of came across Buckminster Fuller when I was sitting on the beach watching the sun rise a few weeks ago. And I was thinking, we're not really watching the sun rise. What are we doing? What are we watching? Anybody? We're watching the earth turn, right? And Buckminster Fuller actually, he said the most important thing to teach your children is that the sun does not rise and set. It is the earth that revolves around the sun. Then teach them the concepts of north, south, east, and west, and that they relate to where they happen to be on the planet's surface at that time. Everything else will follow. So I wanted to start with just thinking about where we are today, and the fact that all of us have something in common. We're all children. We're all kids. And I know that this panel you're going to get to know them all better today, but I thought we might start by asking folks who are sitting up at the front if they can remember when they were kids, who are some of the people that they looked up to, that they admired. And I would like to start with Dr. Joe Garland.
He drew the straw.
Who did I look up to when I was a child?
Yeah.
Use the mic.
Oh.
Who were your? Yeah, use the microphone and pull the mic up. And someone did that for me.
Perfect. All right. a lot of people.
Yep.
I would say my parents, certainly. My father's a primary care doctor on a small island in Maine, and so I think I decided to become a doctor largely because I saw the relationship that he had with the community that he served. I would never move to an island in Maine. I live in a large American city, very happy to do so, but that I think influenced me. And I would say another person is my grandmother, who, when her parents died, raised all of her younger siblings and went on to raise 9 children in Thailand at a time when women didn't have a lot of rights in Thailand. She really stood up for all of her children, but in particular my mother, and made sure my mom went to high school and went to college. And so I would not exist if my grandmother had not done that advocacy. So I guess I look up to those 2 people.
That's great. So your grandmother and your father, have they contributed in any way to the work that you're doing today?
Certainly. I'm a doctor because of the example my father set. And I would say that my grandmother's influence has been more sort of widespread through my life, but I think it gave me an important cultural connection to my Thai heritage. And I think it gave me an important understanding of the role that one individual can play in affecting the lives of many people. And so my grandmother's choices allowed my mother to come to college in the United States, allowed her to meet my father, allowed me to exist, as I said. But also her sacrifice is something that I think people don't appreciate enough, the things that you choose not to do so that someone else will have opportunities.
Thank you, Joe. Erika Guadalupe Núñez.
Yes.
Welcome to the discussion.
Thank you.
And as a kid, when you were growing up, did you have any role models or mentors that helped you?
Well, I think looking back now, my parents helped me a lot growing up. And as a child, I never realized the sacrifices they made for me. For example, my mom, me and her, we crossed the border when we were 10 years old together. So it was as simple as her carrying me on her back, when I was tired. Making sure that she would give me the water instead of her drinking it, very simple things like that. But then my dad as well, he helped support me get into college. He was sort of like, yes, you're undocumented, yeah, it's really hard for you to get financial aid, that doesn't matter. We came here for you to have a better life, and I'm going to help you do that. So as a child, as a young adult, like a teenager, I was like, God damn it, I have all these pressures, I have to live up to both of my parents' expectations because they sacrificed so much for me, but looking back, it was such a huge sacrifice for them to leave everything they knew just so that I could have a better life. So.
Thank you. Fernando, I'm going to move on to a different question. I'm curious.
I was going to say what Joe said.
Yeah. You're an attorney. You're an attorney and a professor, which means you've accomplished, you've managed to stay on the straight and narrow for some part of your life, so to speak. As a child, were there times when that you can recall when you really went off the path and got into some serious trouble?
No.
Never. Come on. That's too easy.
Erika?
That's too easy. Lies, yeah. He's not going to earn a candy. Is there something from your childhood that you can share with us where you did not see yourself where you're sitting today, where you really thought you were going in a different direction? Did you always know you were going to be an attorney?
Why didn't you tell us you were going to ask us these hard questions?
These are easy.
These are not easy questions. What child knows what they want to be when they grow up? So little did I know that I'd be a lawyer, much less an immigration lawyer. So, I'm just leading my life as an immigrant kid in Miami, Florida. And I was a good little boy. So.
At what point in your life did you decide that you would become an attorney?
So I'm Chinese. My father's Chinese, my mother's Cuban, and I was born in Cuba. And so when we came over from Cuba to Miami, we went to immigration lawyers paying lots of money, and I was my family's interpreter. So, they kept harassing me, call the lawyer, when is your ex coming, when is your auntie coming, when is your XYZ coming over? So then when I was in law school, they still kept asking me, like, call the lawyer. So I said, let me become an immigration lawyer and get these people out my family off my back. It's like that's the personal impinging or influencing the professional.
Yeah. Great. And Kimberly, you're down at the far end. Do you have any mentors in your life now?
Actually, I believe the answer to that is I was getting ready for the question we asked Joe. So and the answer to both those questions is actually my grandmother as well. And
Yeah.
Joe and I were just speaking about my grandmother when we were eating, actually. And she is the consummate community health nurse. And I grew up with a little different perspective, I think, than most. I'm around a lot of nursing students now. That's what I do every day. And so I know that many of them, unless exposed in school, have no aspect of what community health nursing is, and specifically HIV community health nursing. So my grandmother not only was what I looked to as what a nurse is. I never wanted to stay in the hospital, and God bless those who do, but I always wanted to be out and making a change in people's lives and trying to right whatever I could that I felt was wrong. And she continues to be. I'm very lucky. I still have her. She's 89,
Wow.
and I still have her. And she's still my mentor, because every day she asks me on the phone, what are you doing? What did you do today? And she still has a grand amount of insight for me.
How many people still have their grandmother living?
One.
Or grandfather? Oh. Curious. That's a gift. You're lucky that you still have
Truly
it.
a gift.
Erika. I'm sorry. No. Erika Almiron.
Yes.
Could you please tell us who are some of the people from your childhood that inspired you?
I mean, I think everyone in this panel has described their parents. My parents were very influential, also kind of like Erika. I realized early on how much they gave up to give me a better future. My parents came with literally like $100 in their pocket. Seems like an old story, but it's true. And they've worked all kinds of jobs to this day. They clean houses to make a living. So I think that, they are definitely people who have inspired me throughout my life about what it means to be hardworking and what it means to fight for what you believe in. They've had lots of obstacles in their lives. And I was also preparing for that first question. So the thing that stood out to me was when we moved from New York we moved to Norristown when I was in third grade. And I had been the first Latina to go into my school. So it was a predominantly white school at the time. And for 2 years, nobody would sit with me. Like, it was a pretty rough experience. I did not know what the word spick was. It took me till the lady who lived downstairs from us was like, well, you should know what this means because that's what the kids are calling you. So I did get into my first fight by the time I was in fourth grade. And in fourth grade, Sister Bernadette gave us a project to do, and I remember being obsessed with Harriet Tubman and wanting to learn more about her, and I had to do a presentation about her, and I felt like I was, since then, I think, wanting to know what the word freedom meant and really thinking about the word freedom. So I think that for all these years, she's been an inspiration to me.
So back to Kimberly. Can we start with getting some up-to-date information on your life? Your grandmother had inspired you and continues to play an important role in your life, but could you share with the room what you have been working on recently?
So what I do, the majority of my time these days, is I'm actually the director of the Women's Health Nurse Practitioner Program at Drexel College of Nursing. And part of the reason I switched from full-time clinical care almost 2 years ago to go into academia is because I remember from a nursing student's perspective that there was really a true lacking not only of community nursing in education, but specifically HIV and curriculum in nursing schools. So part of my mission to be there is to, I was saying to Joe, is to talk to everybody that wants to hear me, but even talk to those who don't want to hear me as much as possible. And also grow the curriculum in the School of Nursing, not only where I am, but possibly nationally. I also have the opportunity to see patients at the partnership practice at Drexel, so we're Ryan White funded, and I do primarily women's HIV care, GYN, and also now with the recommendations of PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, help to work with many discordant couples, along with coordinate couples in having safe conception and have babies.
How many people are familiar with the partnership practice? A show of hands. Yeah, good. There are folks that aren't familiar with it, though. Could you just briefly tell everyone what it is?
Okay. Well, I'm not the spokesperson for the partnership. I won't do that. But it is a Ryan White funded care center for primary care. It's very similar to LACS Center, more in an academic setting where LACS is so lucky to be in a community setting. That's where I come from. I actually spent 20 years at the AIDS Care Group in Chester City. So my base is community. But I enjoy the time that I'm there. We do provide full spectrum Ryan White care services, and also OBGYN, which I'm very much a part of, and case management, and access to medications.
Okay, good. And Joe, would you mind telling folks, you're involved with many different activities.
Sure.
What are the sort of the primary things that you're involved with now?
Sure. I guess I'll move the mic over. I'm a quiet talker. So my main job is I work as a doctor at the Jonathan Lack Center, which is a clinic at Philadelphia Fight, seeing HIV positive people, regardless of whether people have insurance or don't have insurance or immigration status. At Fight, we're lucky to have the opportunity to sort of specialize in work with, sort of build skills in working with specific subsets of the HIV positive population of Philadelphia. So I particularly work with returning citizens, ex-offenders, and I work with immigrant populations. My other hats are, at Penn we have a clinic for newly arrived refugee patients, so I see patients at the refugee clinic at Penn. And I work for an organization called Fuentes de Salud on Monday and Wednesday evenings. It's a clinic that sees mostly Spanish-speaking patients without health insurance. So those are sort of my different hats and why I ended up on the panel.
Yeah, that deserves a round of applause. Before I was sitting, I was watching Fernando shake his head several times.
Like, when do you sleep?
Yeah,
That's the question.
I have a very accommodating job, so they've been very kind to give me the space to continue with my interests. And it sounds like a lot of different hats. They intersect a lot. I see a lot of refugees at Fight. I see a lot of Spanish-speaking patients at Fight. So the intersections of the clinics, if I see a patient who would be better served at in an HIV specialty clinic, who is Spanish-speaking but shows up at Fuentes de Salud, but really main issues are around HIV care, then I'll say, why don't you come see me at Philadelphia Fight? So I think that it sounds more complicated than it is.
Mm-hmm. So Joe is a Harvard Medical School graduate. Is that right?
Yes.
I know you don't like hearing that, but you like hearing the word Harvard. When you were in school, did you know that you were going to be working with this population?
No, one of the things I really admire about Kiyoshi Kuromiya was the way that he was able to see, across one person's life experience to the commonalities amongst different groups who have suffered from oppression or who have been marginalized in one way or another. And I don't think I'm nearly as intelligent as Kiyoshi was, nor as good at it, but I do think one thing I have learned from his example and many others is the shared experience of marginalized populations. And the reason I went into medicine was I was really interested in the care of immigrants. And I still remain very interested in the care of immigrants, but I also have now found that working with returning citizens from incarceration, face many of the same issues of difficulty with access, of being marginalized in society. I find that working with people who were born in this country, but for one reason or another are marginalized by society, being LGBT, as an example, face many of the same issues. So I think, yes, I went into medicine to do what I'm doing, but I think it's broadened in the time that I've done it.
Thank you. Erika, could you share with the room what you do now?
Sure.
I know you have your full-time job, but you also have passion for other things outside of Juntos. If you could share a little bit about both.
Sure. I'm the executive director of Juntos, and Juntos is an immigrant rights organization. It's based out of South Philadelphia, but we work in the greater Philadelphia area. So I've been doing that I've been doing organizing and kind of like human rights work for over 10 years. I actually used to work in this building for the Mexico-U.S. border program years ago. So I think that, the work that we do in Juntos is about community empowerment and really building community to fight for their rights, like leadership development, understanding campaign work, understanding what it means to have power, beyond just like politics. Like, what does it mean to be able to push back against unjust laws? Because and we have a lawyer here next to us, not every law is just, right? We know that. So how do we start changing things to really, sorry. And so that's been kind of my work. I've done youth organizing in the past. I was with the Philadelphia Student Union. And I actually worked for a few years also with Planned Parenthood and was working with the HIV/AIDS clinic in Chester County as their main translator for several years. So I went from social service into social justice work. And I've also, and and this is funny you say this because I wish I had more time to do it and I need to find the balance in my life to do it. But I love photography. I'm kind of an artist at heart. And so I've done photography for a really long time. I've had some of my works published. I got a Leeway grant several years ago and got a chance to go home. Home for me is South America, Paraguay and Brazil. And got a chance to document the landless movement down there. And the landless movement is essentially a lot of campesinos or people who live in the campo who have been ousted from their land and have been fighting back to regain their land. So I know people have been, how many people have been watching the World Cup, right? And there's a lot of unrest right now in Brazil as they've been building these stadiums and basically ousting people from their home. And so a lot of that comes from the landless movement. So I had a chance to see that, and I also had a chance to document prison conditions in both of those countries. And very scary, I think, is that across the world, people are emulating our prison system here, which we know is flawed. So I've seen that shift also back in our home country. So if anybody ever wants to shoot me pictures, let me know.
Do you show your pictures anywhere?
I was in the Fringe Festival years ago. Like right after I did that, I had some of my pictures that were shown at the Fringe Festival. Al Dia had done a couple of cover stories, like the spreads of some of my images. But I haven't had the energy to actually like publish more than that.
Thank you. Fernando.
Sure. Well, first of all, is Shamika here? Yep. Oh, just want to thank you for bringing this all together. And I think on this panel, I think Kim and I are the only ones, I'm going to assume, who actually knew Kiyoshi. So I took long drives with him up to New York for several meetings. So thank you for doing this. It's a great way to remember him. So I have a very simple life, much more simple than Joe's. I basically work with three groups. One is immigrants themselves, and the second group that I work with is students, and the third group of people that I work with is nonprofit organizations. So with students, I teach at Penn, and I teach immigration and refugee law, and I hope that I have like a geometric impact. I can't help 1,000 newcomers, but by teaching one student, that student might be able to help 5 people. And that other student might be able to help 5 people. So I teach students on what's immigration, what's an immigrant, how do people get a green card, so that when they grow up and get out, they can then use that information. I also teach a separate course, which is a subset of immigration, and that's refugee law. And refugees are very specific kinds of people. And so my students, I teach them on how to recognize and help a refugee. Been fortunate for the last 4 years, we've been going to Jordan to interview Iraqis, and to Iraq to interview Syrians, and to Ecuador to interview Colombians, and to Costa Rica to interview Nicaraguans. These are all people who flee their country, go next door and send help. So that's one thing that I do. I work with students, and then with them I work with immigrants themselves who need help, be they needing help here in the US or abroad. And then the other thing I do, there's another school at Penn, and in addition to the law school, there's another thing a couple of blocks away, and it's called the School of Social Policy and Practice. And there I teach students who want to be like a Jane, they want to be executive directors. So I teach them all the headaches that it entails in being an executive director, what's a board, what's a foundation, what's a proposal, what's money, what's marketing, and all that. And then I work with nonprofits themselves on issues of planning or transition or staff development. So I work both with students, with clients, and with nonprofit organizations.
Thank you. Erika, what are you up to?
Well, I graduated college a year ago, but what I've mainly been I moved to Philadelphia, and I think the reason that I'm on this panel is what I do outside of my job, which is I organize with Dream Activists Pennsylvania and National Immigrant Youth Alliance. A lot of my work basically is holding workshops, stopping deportations, and making art for the movement. I recently had a chance to collaborate with Erika and Juntos, where I helped design a banner for them, and I helped teach people how to do silk screens for one of their rallies that they were having. So for me, art is very important, and I think immigrant stories, especially undocumented immigrant stories, can be shown in a way that people can connect with very easily through art, where it's visual or where it's word or anything like that. Some of the recent big projects that I've undertaken last 2 years is we had a big rally outside of Montgomery County Correctional Facility where we protested a prison contract between the prison and immigration, where the prison was basically making money off of holding immigrants on top of the actual money they were already making from the state. So they were getting paid like an extra $50 to $75 a head per night per bed. So what we did is we protested the prison, and me and 2 other people, and we eventually got the contract shut down. So that was one of the really exciting things. As I mentioned, I work in Philly, and I work at Raíces Culturales Latinoamericanas, and it is a Latin nonprofit art org that basically promotes Latin American art and culture. Whether it's visual, whether it's dance, whether it's music, a lot of it's folkloric. And I'm very lucky that's my day job. So, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you very much. And now we're going to turn to Fernando to help us understand who the immigrant and refugee community are here in Philadelphia. If we could step back and just from a legal perspective, how does one become an immigrant or a refugee?
Great. So here's immigration law in 2 minutes. Normally takes me 14 weeks. No. So, so people could come here in one of 2 ways. One is the category we call a non-immigrant, and there's like 24 different ways to come in as a non-immigrant. And now we're in class 2 of my class. So you could come in as a foreign student. You could come in to work temporarily at CHOP. You could come in to be a priest because there are not enough U.S. citizens going into the convent or the seminary for various reasons. You could come in to work at the IT department of Philadelphia Fight. So there's a bunch of ways that you can come in for a short term. So non-immigrant, short term are examples that people can come in to the U.S. You could also, so by the way, a great analogy is think of to come into this room, you need a door and a key. To come into this country, you need a passport and a visa. So a passport is like a door, and a United States visa is like a key to get into this house, this room. And so if you're in Jamaica and you want to come to the US, you need your Jamaican passport, and you need a visa or a key to come into the US when you arrive at Philadelphia International Airport. So anyway, there's like 24 different ways you can come in for a short term. To study at Penn for 4 years, that's short term. To work at the Friends Center and fix their computers for 2 years, that's a short term. To come in and be a nurse from the Philippines at CHOP, that's short term for 3 years. to come in and visit for 3 months, that's short term. These are all different ways. And then to go to Peter's question, if you don't want to go back home and you're already here, there are 16 ways to stay here, but the 2 main ways are get sponsored by a family member. So your mother, father, brother, sister, husband, wife, or child over 21 can sponsor you. Mother, father, brother, sister, husband, wife, or child over 21 can sponsor you. Or if you came as a visitor and you don't want to go back home, get a company to sponsor you. Philadelphia Fight can sponsor foreign Thai doctor to work doing infectious diseases because they can't find any U.S. citizen who knows infectious diseases. So if you want to stay here, never go back and stay here forever, become a lawful permanent resident. The name of the word for that in the street is get your green card. You can be sponsored by a family member or be sponsored by a job. And then the third way, if you have neither a family member to sponsor you or a job to sponsor you, the third way is you sponsor yourself and you say, don't send me back home because I'll be persecuted or killed or tortured. And so if you're from Ethiopia and you are actually changed to today, if you're from Liberia or Sierra Leone and you land in Philly, you came as a visitor, and your visa is about to expire and you have to go back home in 2 months, you can go to a nonprofit organization and say, help me apply for asylum, I don't want to go back. I have a fear of being persecuted if you send me back to Liberia or Sierra Leone, Ethiopia. Help me tell my story to the government so I can stay here. And so those are the main 3 ways that people can stay here and never have to go back: being sponsored by a family member, being sponsored by a job, and asking for refuge or asylum or protection because you'll be killed or something bad will happen to you if you go back. So that's sort of the main way that people here in Philly will, those are the remedies they're asking for if they want to go back. So they might go to a doctor, for example, an asylum seeker might go and say, I'm applying for asylum. I have to show that I'm afraid of being persecuted because of some reasons. Could you write an affidavit saying that you've assessed me and that on my back are some whips, manifestation of whipping or torture, because that'll help make my case strong. Or they might go to a nurse or a psychologist and say, I'm applying for asylum. Could you write an affidavit saying that I have post-traumatic stress, that I can't sleep, because that'll help my story be believed by the Immigration Service. So again, people come to the U.S. In many ways with a key and a door, with a passport and a visa, or sometimes they just sneak across the border from, let's say, Sri Lanka to Canada, from Canada into Buffalo, or from China to Mexico, and from Mexico up into Arizona, Texas, or California, so they're just coming without papers. Or they can come in with papers, and then they don't want to go back when they're supposed to. So then if they want to stay here, they have to they have to have a family member to sponsor them, a job to sponsor them, or they can sponsor themselves. Immigration 101 in a nutshell.
That's excellent, thank you. To the 2 Erikas who are sitting at the table, you both work, you talked about your family's experience. And it was different than the majority of the ways that Fernando was just talking about. Can you talk a little bit? I'll start with Erika from Juntos. Can you talk a bit about the community that you're working with and their experience with the immigration laws, and how they came to be here, and what role immigration law plays in their lives?
So I'll say that when Juntos was started about 12 years ago in South Philadelphia, addressing the needs of a fairly new Mexican immigrant population that had grown. So South Philly is known for kind of being a hub for immigrant populations. I think recently we've really decided to do some work across the city. So you have communities from Brazil, from Ecuador, from Central America. There's a huge influx of Central Americans. I would say that the majority of our community members had family members that were here first, and that they were coming to meet their family members. I would say most are here undocumented. Most either came through the border or overstayed a visa. And there are ways to do visas. My parents came on a visa. They came on a tourist visa. And the way that it operated was, you can't really get a visa unless you have money, right? So you have to prove that you have money in order to come to this country. So the game is that you basically have somebody lend you money to put in your bank. And then that way you can prove that you have some money, and then you have to pay that back with like through a loan shark. So at that time, my parents had gotten money put in the bank to prove that they had money. They had no money. They came over here with no money, and then they overstayed their visa, so they came here as a tourist. And so those are kind of the ways in which our communities come, and some of the struggle about that is that a lot of our folks tend to live hidden and underground for fear of deportation, for fear of being profiled, or we've seen like a big like uptick of ways in which our communities are being profiled and being targeted by immigration and by police, and have been like hyper criminalized by the ways in which the society has basically historically done for this nation, which is like, who are the people we don't want and how do we get rid of them? And so I think that that's something that we've seen happening, and so I think it's important for us to kind of see that aspect of this work. But yeah, that's basically been our.
And why you work in the community? Why were people coming in the first place?
I think it varies. I think mostly we can talk about it as push out, right? So I think people are always saying that people are coming for a better life, and that's kind of like the surface way of talking about what's happening. But what actually is happening is that you're seeing U.S. involvement in some of these countries decimate the economy. You see wars that are decimating communities across the country, and that those kind of policies impact our countries. And so, I think my first uncle that came here came as an asylee, a political asylee, and was a political prisoner for 2 years as he was trying to resist. He was trying to resist a right government that was basically a dictatorship for almost 40 years, and that was facilitated by the United States, right? That was actually something that happened 40 years ago, facilitated by the U.S. And so we see that, you see like the NAFTA being the North American Free Trade Agreement created poverty to the extent that when I was working here at the AFSC, when we would go to the border towns, to the maquiladoras, which is basically all of those abandoned factories that we see in North Philly, they wound it up right over the border in Mexico, right? And so what they're doing is rather than pay here, they're paying people $8 a day to survive, which you can't survive off of $8 a day. So those are the reasons that people are coming. And so I think it's important to recognize that the idea like get in line or get a visa, it's impossible. When you're talking about people coming here, they're coming here for survival, right? It's about their human right to survive.
So I guess the community that I grew up with was immediately first my family. We came without papers. We crossed the border one night. It took us 3 days to cross, and I was 10 years old. But I grew up not talking about it. No one really knew about it. I think it came out in my college application essays and my scholarship program in high school. And then when I got to college, the community that I initially surrounded myself with was kind of like the dreamer movement. And I say dreamer now, and I kind of step away from that label because it kind of, dreamer means, young child who was brought over by their parents and is more Americanized. And we shouldn't blame them for the actions their parents did. Their parents did. They should be allowed to stay here. So that's what kind of like dreamers are. Or the language that surrounds dreamers, sort of like they're a better immigrant than the parents that brought them here. So now a lot of the work that I do with Dream Activist PA and National Immigrant Youth Alliance is kind of advocating more for people who necessarily wouldn't be considered a dreamer. Youth who have a criminal record, for example, or youth who never got a chance to go to college because it's hella stressful to be 18 years old and have to apply to college when you're afraid of deportation. And we shouldn't, punish them for not getting into Bryn Mawr, example, right? Because that's not realistic. And then there's also parents, for example, like my father, he was arrested dropping my brother off at school one day because my brother overslept and missed the bus. So my dad was like, I'll drive you, And he was put in deportation proceedings. He's kind of a person who would be like, you know what, we don't want him here because he's like a drain on our resources, But a lot of the cases that we've done with Dream Activist PA and also that Juntos has helped with is parents that have a criminal record. They might have some drug offenses, or they might have gotten caught up with a traffic violation. And these are people that normally aren't advocated for in the mainstream immigrant movement. So a lot of that. And this is kind of in a personal progression where I stepped away from trying to advocate for people who we thought were worthy, you know, stepping away from the criminalization of like our own community, because that doesn't help anyone, basically.
Can I add something to that? Because I think some of the things that we've also learned doing this work together, you know, I did a lot of youth organizing work, and we talked a lot about the hyper-criminalization of young people of color, and immigrant youth are not separate from that, right? So we see a mass, they can move to mass incarceration in this country, right? And that's also kind of like, what do you do with people that you don't really want in your society? Well, like we then bump up all of these crimes, we make sure that things like drug offenses are crimes, and then we lock as many people up. And so we used to do workshops with young people to show the growth, even in the state of Pennsylvania, of prisons, right? And that's not separate from the deportation in this country, right? So we're at a place right now where we see deportations at about 400,000 a year, right? This president has deported more people than anybody in the history of this country. We're talking about over 2 million people have been deported, and it's basically the same thing. What do you do with the disposable, the people you don't want? How do you criminalize them? And so I think when we talk about communities who are targeted, you know, our communities are also racially profiled, and our young people are also dropping out of some of our schools in Philadelphia. We know the crisis in Philly. We had so many young people in Philly who dropped out of school, and we're caught up. You know, we're caught up trying to figure out how to survive, and are selling drugs. And what does that mean? What is our response? Do we deport them? Do we incarcerate them? Or do we think of a different way to address some of the conditions in our community?
So as I was preparing for today's panel, I Googled Erika Guadalupe Núñez, right? And I came across a video that I found online. And of course I had watched this video, and I got to meet Erika first virtually. And she said basically, if you're watching this video, I've been arrested. Can you talk a little bit about what happened and why you did that?
Yeah. So that was the contract that I mentioned earlier. It was Montgomery County Correctional Facility. They were getting paid extra money by immigration for holding undocumented people. So I guess this is part of the progression where I started stepping away from the Dreamer label. Essentially, I guess I was in an action and I was arrested. And previously, before then, I was considered a model immigrant. I was what all the newspapers, whenever they call me, be like, Erika, Dreamer, student at Bryn Mawr, straight A, 4.0 girl, you know, she needs to stay here, she gets to stay here, right? We need her here. So that kind of language really frustrated me, because it's like, I think about my mom, you know, who works like 6 days out of the week cleaning hotels so I can go to Bryn Mawr. Or my dad, who works the night shift at a factory, who is, for a long time, wasn't able to drive. He wasn't able to go to the grocery store to pick up anything. He had to walk or have someone drive him because he was so afraid of being deported. So I was thinking about that, and I was kind of like, this label is really problematic. So then what has been going on in the Dream Activist Pennsylvania group and also National Immigrant Youth Alliance is we do civil disobedience actions, because it's sort of like, you know, you can't criminalize certain people and then hold up, like, me on a pedestal, you know. So it's sort of like us being like, fuck this label, like, you know, you can't put us in a box, basically, sort of thing. And then that action, too, is where I started thinking more about the prison industrial complex and how that affected, you know, not just immigrants, but also communities of color, and looking at those intersections and why they were so important.
If I could put what happened to Erika into a larger context. So in our American system of government, there's two kinds of law: criminal law and civil law. If you're convicted of a crime, if you are charged with a crime and you're convicted, and the penalty is a year or more in jail, that's called a felony. If you're charged with a crime and the penalty is a year or less in jail, that's called a misdemeanor. So that's criminal law. And if you're charged with a crime that's a felony, we give you a lawyer for free. Because that's, you know, being in jail for a year or more, that's really important. That's a big deal. So you want to make sure you have good representation. And the people who typically represent you, if you don't have any money, are called the public defenders. For the civil area of law, if you want a divorce, if you want to sue me because I ran over your foot with my car, if you want to sue your landlord, if you want to open up a store, that's civil law. There's no right to an attorney at government expense. So that's one thing I want to say. In the immigration law, is civil in nature. So it's like getting a divorce, adoption, marriage, buying a grocery store. So you don't have a right to a lawyer. So even though a lot of immigration, some of immigration sounds and tastes and smells like criminal law, because people like Erika go to jail, you're not entitled to a lawyer at government expense like a public defender. So that's the second thing I want to say. So there's civil law, criminal law. Criminal law, you're entitled to a lawyer if the punishment is felony. Civil law, you don't have a right to a lawyer for immigration issues. Now the federal government, when they pick you up all around the country, they contract with county government prisons. And our closest county government that the federal government pays money to house immigrants is York County, for example, in Lancaster. So every March, which is the 7 weeks into a 14-week semester, in my refugee law class, my students go to York County Prison. They wake up at 6, we're in the car by 7, we're at York County by 8:30, and then the gates open, and then we go in there, and we interview asylum seekers. In this day and age, in 2014, most of them are from West Africa. Years ago, they were from China, and before that, they were from Guatemala, Honduras, or El Salvador. So the demographics change, but the issues are the same. For reasons that Erika mentioned, people are either pushed out or they're pulled in, and then if they come in without papers and they're caught without papers in the East Coast, they go to York County Prison. And it's great, and to use Erika's word, it's great money for the counties, because the feds give the county, at least York County, $66 per person to house them daily. In Georgia, the prisons are cheaper. New York, it's more expensive. So if you land at JFK without a passport, or you threw your passport down the toilet on the plane, and you go through customs without a passport, they'll send you to York County or down south, and then good luck at a lawyer. At your expense, because I just told you 3 minutes ago that in immigration context, the government does not give you a lawyer. The only exception to that rule is the city of New Jersey just passed an executive order, the mayor did, giving lawyers to immigrants in deportation proceedings. But that's a crazy city of New York only thing. But around the country, you are not entitled to a lawyer at government expense. Get your own, or call Hebrew Immigrant Aid, or call Catholic Charities, or call Lutherans, or call Nationality Services Center. And if those lawyers have time to drive to your county and represent you, or if my students can see you, good. If not, too bad.
Something that I want to elaborate on, the action was very important too, because it was like how I came out of the shadows, and we mentioned that phrase earlier, coming out of the shadows, like declaring your legal status. It was really important too, because it showed the community that, because when I was in the jail, immigration came and interviewed me, and they were like, you're very eligible for deportation right now. We could put you on a plane today, and you could be gone. And I was like, well, are you going to do it? You're not going to do it, And I knew they were going to do it. They couldn't do it because I had such a huge community, rallying for my release, right? So what happens when you come out of the shadows is the community realizes who you are, right? So we're basically telling, people like my mom and my dad, you know what, Mom, Dad, if you come out of the shadows and you have a community behind you, immigration can't touch you because people are going to be pissed off, and people are going to be angry. And a good case of that is when I was in the prison, I met someone, her name was Alicia, and she was an undocumented immigrant. And when I got there, she was held for 3 months already. And she was arrested for shoplifting food and clothes for her daughters. And the charges actually got dismissed. So criminally, they were like, we're going to let this go, we're going to let this woman do ARD, which is like some sort of like probation thing. But because she got put in the criminal system, immigration held her. And was sort of like, this woman's going to get deported. And they had her in this sort of limbo state for like 3 months, where she didn't know what was going on. There was no illegal interpreters for her. She didn't know shit, basically, what was going to happen to her. And how we got help for her is me and my friend were talking in Spanish because a guard was near us, and we were like, we're gonna figure out what we're gonna do, blah blah blah. And she heard us and was like, she started sobbing. She was like, you speak Spanish, like, can you help me, And we ended up getting her released later on because we publicized her case in a petition and with media and all this stuff. And then people got mad. They're like, why are you holding a mom of 2 citizen children, for a crime that was dismissed, So that kind of gives you an idea of like why it's so important to like come out of the shadows and sort of like drop the shame. In a way, as like also as an undocumented queer is what I would say. It's sort of similar, coming out of the closet, sort of being like, you know what, I don't care what you do to me because I am proud of who I am, blah, this and that. But I know that I do come from a very privileged position where I can do that. So, yeah.
Well, actually, it makes me want to ask the question: as you get the courage and you're encouraging others to have the courage to do that, are you in fact saying own it and own whatever the consequences may be, own it, as opposed to
Yeah.
nothing's going to happen to you if you own it. There may in fact be things that happen
Yeah.
to you, right?
I think a lot of times we tell people like, hey, we did this, and you know what, this is an option for you, but it's the same as, you can't out someone. That's not okay, it's not cool. It's up for that person to decide. If they want to say, you know what, if they want to publicly declare their legal status, they can do it, But yeah, I would never want someone to be like, you should do this now, this and that, but I like to say that it's like an option for people. And again, like I know I'm like mad privileged where I was able to be like, hey, I'm gay and I'm undocumented, this and that, and I knew that I would be okay because I had this huge community behind me. And a lot of people don't realize that until later. So it's up to them to decide, basically.
Thank you.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure, and then we're going to, after this, we're going to switch to the far end of the table where we're going to bring in a different perspective.
Sure. And I want to follow up with what Fernando had said about civil and criminal law and kind of the ways in which that looks. But what isn't different is the ways in which our communities are targeted, right? So if it's a civil law, then we are still having ICE break down doors to get into people's houses with guns, pulling immigration and customs enforcement. So they operate as a police force. They essentially operate like a police force. People are targeted. When you have a raid on your house, like our community, we do a lot of trainings in the community about what your rights are. Like, make sure that they have a warrant. Make sure the warrant says this. Don't open the door if it doesn't say that. If it does say that, you step out. Don't let anybody else in the house get caught up because immigration comes to the house. But we've had cases of immigration pulling out guns with children present, doing raids, having warrants. So even though we talk about immigration as civil, right, the repercussions are that you are targeted as a criminal, right, and you do have situations where, it feels very much like you're under attack, right? So I think that conversation needs to also be happening so people understand what that looks like from the perspective of our community, because it isn't easy to come out. We had a young person about 3 years ago who went to her first march, and I had to call her mother. And her mother was crying. She said, no, you can't take her. And I was like, she will be with me. She will be next to me. Nothing will happen. Mom couldn't let her go by herself. And so mom went and marched with us. This is around immigrant rights work. And sobbed the whole time. Just sobbed, just petrified that ICE was going to pick them up in that moment. Right? And this is kind of the fear that runs through our communities. And she spent the next several years coming to events, doing trainings. And now is probably one of the most vocal people. She has come out. She has said she is undocumented. She harasses everybody in the community to do it. But the place you come from originally is fear, right? And so I think that's really real. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Joe said earlier when we started that Kiyoshi Kuromiya, who we honor today with a thing like this, saw the intersection of a lot of groups that were marginalized. So when you hear Erika talk about the police barging on your door, if this sounds familiar because you're Jewish and you recall the Nazi era, or if you're black and you remember the 1960s, when in Mississippi, etc., the police would open up your doors and just, drag you out. Or if you're gay, and there's a very famous Supreme Court decision where, as recently as 20 years ago, the police went in and saw two guys sleeping together and charged them with criminal sodomy, which is a felony. So history repeats itself of government bad stuff happening against marginalized communities, and now it's happening to immigrants. So it's same old, same old. That's why it's so great that, as Joe said, Kiyoshi saw the intersections and the similarities that a lot of communities face. And so what is happening to immigrants today with police raiding your, coming in unannounced, happened before in Germany, in the South, with gay communities, and now it's, with the immigrant community.
And so going to the community that Kimberly serves and has been working with for 20 plus years now, can you first describe the community that you work with, and then some of the challenges or barriers that they face in accessing, whether it's a healthcare or an economic opportunity or social opportunity here in the United States?
Sure. So one thing I didn't say earlier is that the community that I often work in, not in my day job, is actually I have the opportunity to work with many women, families, and couples who are originally from West Africa and the Caribbean, but the majority of West Africa. And one thing I'm so jealous about some of the wonderful conversation that's happening here today, because while I don't speak for all West African women infected or affected by HIV, I can speak for the few that I've had the opportunity to know and work with every day. And when we speak about coming out of the shadows, I have a very sad story, actually, about that. It was triumphant when it happened, and I was very happy. We had and actually she's going to really get angry with me, but I'm going to call out this young lady right here, Tigita Kaba. Tigita, wave. She won't stand up. So Tigita and I have worked together for years. We're so young, so I'm not going to say how many. But Tigita is the founder of an organization called the African Family Health Organization, AFAHO, in West Philadelphia. And she and I have worked with a group of women, HIV-positive West African and Caribbean women, in a support group for a number of years. We started this support group. We did, but really our patients kind of came together. Because what we would find is that Tigita in the city of Philadelphia, and I way out in not Philadelphia, not that far, but it always seems so far, in Delaware County, I would see, just trickling in a woman one day from Liberia, or a woman one day from Sierra Leone. And while those two numbers then became 10, then became 15, then became 200. And this phenomena is, why are these women who primarily live in West Philadelphia traveling to Chester City to come see this little clinic? And what we found is that initially it was because they could go outside of their community, outside of their neighborhood, and see someone and not worry about finding their neighbor or their sister or someone that knows their aunt, and they would not have to fear so much the disclosure. And in preparation for today's panel, I actually spoke to quite a few ladies that are in our support group, and we kind of did this dog and pony show for a couple of years, where the women would actually come along with me and speak, which was unheard of. It's very hard, obviously, to get up and talk about your story, but when you're worried that someone in the audience is going to out you to your family, your community, both here and abroad, it becomes a monumental task. So I spoke to quite a few of them and said, hey, would you like to come with me today? We want to get the show back together. And many of the words I'm using today, I'm humbled by them, and I'm sharing the ladies' words, not my own, because they won't come here. And it's no reflection on the audience. But what unfortunately happened is, with all that wonderful work and someone coming out being West African and saying, yes, I have HIV, and yes, I can speak to you, and I'm not dying, I'm very healthy, and this is what happens, this is my reality. One young woman was outed in an event by a community worker from her own country. And unfortunately, what happened is she actually left the country after that, went back to her country of origin, stopped taking her medications, and I didn't see her for 2 years until she came back, and she died shortly after. And she was 32, with a child. So while things change and they improve, I mean, we can all speak about atrocities, but we can also speak about some wonderful things that have happened. Before, not too long ago, you couldn't even say you were coming to America with HIV unless you had a waiver, right? Okay, so there's some wonderful things, and there's things that change, but there's also things that unfortunately stay the same. And for some communities, coming out of the shadows is not their reality. They can't do it. And you put the stigma and the politics of HIV together with the stigma and the politics of being an undocumented immigrant or refugee or asylee, and the complexities there are monumental.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Is there anything else you want to share before I ask Dr. Garland?
No, because I said all the problems. I'm going to wait for the solution.
Hopefully it's in the room, and they're not all expecting it to come from the panel. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
But so Dr. Garland, Joe,
Yeah.
could you talk a little bit about the population that you're working with? And, does anything resonate that you've heard so far from either Kimberly or from the side of the table?
I think a lot of things resonate. I think that I work in several different communities, and one of the things I try that I think is important about what Fernando brought up earlier is even within sort of the narrow view of healthcare, healthcare access for people who have been granted refugee status or granted asylum is sort of on one end of a spectrum of having access. Being undocumented puts you on an entirely different level of access about whether you can have any access to health insurance, to Medicaid, to medications, etc. You can't. And so that even people within this broad group that we talk of as immigrants or foreign-born population in the United States has a broad range of access. So I work with newly arrived refugees who actually do have access to Medicaid and healthcare coverage. I also work with mostly undocumented people who really have very limited access. And we see that in our HIV positive populations as well, people who have a lot of access, people who don't have a lot of access. And that's a sort of a narrow view of healthcare, of like sort of how you get the medications that you need in that moment. And the broader view is, I think, what we've been talking about now, and sort of think, how do all these conversations we're having about immigration and deportation and everything, how does that directly impact on healthcare? Well, that, in medicine, we call that the social determinants of health, but it's a broad view of what affects people's health, what affects the health of the individual, and then what affects the health of a community. And so healthcare access is certainly a piece of it, but the anxiety and stress of fear of deportation has negative health outcomes. The concern about whether you should bring your child who has a fever to the doctor or not, because you're worried about whether they're going to ask for papers you don't have, etc., affects not just you but the health of your child. Whether you advise your neighbor whether they should go to this doctor or that doctor, whether they should go to this clinic or not, based on your experiences, affects how that community accesses healthcare. And so I guess what I'm saying is the communities that I work in and with are span a range of different sort of healthcare experiences, but what I have discovered amongst all of them is the social determinants of their health are the biggest impact on sort of, by the time they get to me and they're diagnosed with diabetes, well, that's a little bit late. It's been great if we could have prevented the diabetes from happening 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or prevented in their children. And that's sort of the health of communities, and that's sort of the next piece I have to figure out how we address, and that where immigration plays an incredibly important role in the health of individuals and communities.
Fernando, you knew Kiyoshi. Before we open up the floor to the room for questions, can you share any thoughts or anecdotes or stories that you recall that you'd like to share today?
Yeah, well, Kiyoshi was a Renaissance man who also admired and mentored another Renaissance man, Buckminster Fuller. But Kiyoshi was interested in literature, in technology. He was one of the first to talk about this thing called the internet and email and make the internet available. Before it was that. He was an AIDS activist, a gay activist. He was very serious. He was also very funny. I think there was an artistic side to him. He was also a photographer. So, great memories of Kiyoshi. So I'm really glad that we're remembering him today with an event like this.
And before actually we open up to the room, are there questions that the panelists may have for each other? Let me start by letting you know I did bring some Kit Kats, some racist peanut butter cups, and some what appear to be gluten-free mint patties for those who are concerned about that. But I brought them because we're just hopefully many of you have finally digested your lunches, but you're still alert because the information is so interesting, but your body's maybe a little energy. A little bump. So what my plan was to give you an opportunity to ask the question, but I'm going to give you a treat for doing it. Just a little motivation. And that goes for the panel too. If you ask a question, I will give you some candy. So anybody want to start? No? Well, I'm going to open it up to the floor. And would you like to just stand up and say your name and please ask your question so everyone can hear?
My name is Kathy Bell, and my question is, I heard a program this morning on public radio that spoke of the situation of the minor children coming through the border, and there's now thousands of minor children. And one of the speakers talked about these children not being eligible for legal representation to pursue their right for asylum. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so actually back to what Erika was saying, there's reasons that push you out of, and the kids these days are coming from 3 countries, so it's the same old of like the 1980s. They're leaving El Salvador, Guatemala, or Nicaragua, and they're being pushed out because of the violence. And sometimes the violence and the bad shit going on in their country is because of the U.S., as Erika has intimated. Or sometimes, so they're pushed out because of many reasons, violence, gang, bad economic policies, that it's the U.S.'s fault. And then they're being pulled in because they hear that life is better here. But because of this unprecedented number of unaccompanied kids getting on a bus or a train and then coming into Mexico and then crossing into Arizona, Texas, or California, the president has just issued an order, details to be worked out, that these kids will have access to representation. So just like if your landlord is evicting you, you can go to community legal services and they'll represent you. Or just as if you applied for food, cash, or medical assistance and you were denied, you could go to legal services and they'll represent you for free. If you are an unaccompanied minor, you can go somewhere, I don't know where yet, and then that entity will help you. I will assume that monies will flow from the federal government to one of the nonprofit agencies around the country. In this city, they are Hebrew Immigrant Aid, Catholic Charities, Nationality Services Center. I will assume that they'll get money, and then with that money, they'll either hire more attorneys or they'll train attorneys to take on these cases for free. And so if I volunteer, they'll give me one kid to represent, to see if that kid has some sort of way to stay here. But the only way a kid can stay here, as I told you if you were awake, is if you're sponsored by a family member, sponsored by a job, so you're not, AFSC is not going to hire a 16-year-old to work on their technology, or they can prove asylum. And the child has to say, I have a well-founded fear of being persecuted because of my race, religion, nationality, social group, or political opinion. That's a whole 14-week course in and of itself for me to go into. But anyway, so yes, there's an executive order setting aside funds to help kids get legal aid. Details to be worked out. I don't know how that's going to
Can I have just a follow-up to they reference that there's only one family center in the U.S. and it's in either Bucks County or Berks County. How did we get to have that?
Yeah, so that's so by family center, that's a euphemism for a jail.
Right.
So if you are found right there at the corner, mother, father, and kid, instead of putting the kid at the youth study center, which is where the Barnes now is, and mom here and dad there, we'll put the family unit together in the family center, which is in near Carbon County. It's in the East Coast. So, and then there's another center in the west part of the country. So anything east of the Mississippi, if we find a family unit east of the Mississippi, they'll go to this unit. And how did we get it? The federal government probably put in a bid and said, hear ye, Whoever county prison or center wants to put in a bid to house undocumented families, submit your bid, and the people who can take care for cheapest will give you the bid. So that's how it probably turned out that the state of Pennsylvania is the family center for undocumented families, and they're held together. So that's a positive. At least the families are not disunited, they are kept together united. You could argue, well, why even imprison undocumented families, but that's the law.
In the back here. Glasses.
Hello, my question is for Fernando. You talked about
Give me a break here.
and you talked about family being one of the ways. Can it be extended family as well? Because you mentioned only the people that were like
Mother, father, brothers, yes.
Yeah.
So we inherit our system of government and our culture from the British. And so the definition of family, which we inherited from Europe, is mother, father, brother, sister, husband, and wife. So U.S. citizen grandfather cannot sponsor his granddaughter to get a green card. U.S. citizen uncle cannot sponsor his niece to get a green card. The only people who can sponsor are nuclear family, mother, father, brother, sister, husband, wife, or child over 21.
Here, in the front.
hi.
Oh, and before you, let me know if you want a piece of candy. Kathy, here you are.
I wanted to know, I went over to the National American Jewish History Museum. My father's from Grenada, British West Indies, and he came here and he was sponsored by his employer eventually, and then he became a U.S. citizen and he married my mother, and I'm the product of that. So I wanted to know, they had mutual aid societies. When I was going through the museum, and anyone that was being persecuted or they were going through some type of war, whatever political unrest that was taking place in their original country of origin, they could come here and between the churches or the synagogues, that's where the community piece comes in. That's where everybody banded together and say, okay, well, we're going to make sure that these families get situated in this neighborhood and help them out with some clothing supplies or, whatever is needed. Where is that? Like, don't you have that? And I don't, for the Caribbean community, there should be more of that as well as for the Latino community. And I think that needs to, if we don't have it, there should be more, we can create one.
There you go.
But there are, actually, if you go to Germantown, you'll see buildings that are still in German. So the Germans had a mutual aid society.
That's right.
Juntos functions like a mutual aid society for originally Mexicans. There's a Lao Family Association, a Vietnamese Family Association, a Chinese family. So in certain communities, there are mutual assistance associations. There's maybe the West Africans, the Senegalese, the Sierra Leoneans. They do have what the word that you're using is a mutual aid association. And some are recognized by the government and can get government funding, and some are just, we hang out once a week and we put money in the kitty, and if you need money to bury or somebody, here's money for the funeral expenses. So the MAAs have been around since forever.
They've been around for a while.
I want to just follow up on that because I think what you're speaking to is actually really important in the community, that there aren't a lot of funds, like federal funding for that kind of program for people who don't have social security numbers. Like, it's really hard to get that kind of funding. So what I see is essentially the community itself is organized around it. So recently we've had, I think, 3 people who have died in the community. One was hit by a car, one was killed, one got into a bike accident. And, you have to figure out what are you going to do with this family? How are you going to bury this person? Will you send the body back, right? But all of that's done in community. So people will come together in somebody's living room and literally have conversations. We'll go and support them and see if we can raise any money to do that. But we're talking about thousands of dollars. And I think a prime example for deportations, it's not like aid in itself, but when somebody's picked up, some of the things that we've done and the DREAM activists have done and nationally have happened are these end cases. And so that if you don't have money for a lawyer and you have to, it's so expensive. Once immigration picks somebody up, you're talking about finding a lawyer, right? If you don't have the right lawyer, there are many who rip our communities off, thousands of dollars. right? Thousands of dollars for a lawyer. You're talking about thousands of dollars to like post bail, right, to get out. And I mean, we've seen as high up as to like $20,000-$30,000 to get out, right? And so I think the least that we've seen is about $5,000 for bond. But so what we'll do is we'll have to figure out A, how to publicize the case, B, how to get support, which Erika was talking about earlier, getting petitions and all that nature. And then the community will figure out how to raise money in order to get a lawyer, or to figure out if there's a lawyer out there that can do pro bono work. But the thing is of getting our communities to those resources, because if they don't, many people opt out and just say, you know what, I will just auto-deport myself and just send me home, not knowing that they have the right to be able to fight back.
Yeah, so not to be Debbie Downer here, but I need to mention that in certain populations, in certain communities, there are mutual aid associations. But this same young woman I spoke about, it was a member of her country of origin's mutual aid association that ended up outing her. Yes, so you have to remember that, you know, within certain communities, they're there for a multitude of issues. You know, they'll help with immigration, they'll help with poverty, they'll help with food security, but if you're HIV positive, they may walk away.
Thanks. Okay, in the back.
With American capitalism being as it is and as it is not, what does the panel say to when private conversations such as billionaire Donald Sterling become overwhelmingly public? How does that impact what you do? And also that solid majority of those out here that want to act as a blockade to what you're trying to do.
Somebody want to take that question?
Can you say it one more time, just so I'm
Maybe
clear?
rephrase it.
When conversations are private, such as one Donald Sterling had recently about race and Latinos and housing and renting to them.
Right.
How does that affect what you do in the long run as far as these solid forces that are out there, obviously,
Right.
that want to prohibit
Oh, yeah.
moving forward in
Uh-huh.
terms of immigration as well as integration?
Right. Oh, I can't answer that. I think, you know, I think that's one example of, but I think what we're talking about is those in power, right? Millionaires, billionaires, politicians. When we talk about power analysis in Juntos, we talk about who's in power, who makes those changes, and it's those people that we're talking about, right? And there's deep-seated racism and fear inside of those communities about who is taking over this country. You know, what will this country look like in 20 years from now? There's a comedian who did something earlier about how in 2042, apparently, like, white people will become the minority, right? At a place where, like, people of color will be about 51% of this nation. And so I think one is that we need to identify, like, what we're talking about as, like, the 1%. And what is it that we're asking them to do? And that they're not going to do it out of the kindness of their heart, right? That's not actually how this functions. And I think so much of the immigrant rights movement that I actually see as shifting is basically what Erika was talking about, which is that, you know, if we keep on elevating ourselves in this way of like, we deserve to be here, we're so good, we're so deserving, and trying to appease to people's hearts in that way, that it's not functional. I think that actually when you're talking about organizing and movement building, it's about demanding what is right and what is your human right to be here, and doing things like civil disobedience and really arming yourself. I think that we've taken like lots of lessons from like people like the Panthers or like the Brown Berets and things like that, and just understanding that people will not give you what you deserve just because you're nice.
So actually, interesting you asked that question. I have to leave it too because there's a meeting dealing with just that issue in the foundation world. So there's many foundations in Philly, from the Pew Charitable Trust to William Penn to the Philadelphia Foundation. And there's been a movement among foundations on diversity, inclusion, and equality. And so a bunch of us are meeting from 2 to 5 to see how can we diversify the organizations that give money to like Juntos and the clinics and Philadelphia Fight to make sure that on the boards and on the staff of these foundations that have money are people who understand issues of disability, gender, LGBT issues. So there, at least in Philly and across the country, there are people with power, and they are in foundations who are thinking about these issues.
So may I add one thing to that? By you being at Penn, do you have anything to say about the $25 million donation that the Koch brothers gave?
I'm just a little teacher there.
The gentleman in the front with the yellow.
Hi, my name's Kenneth. I'm portfolio fight and I also volunteer at ProAct. My question for the panel is this: there's a family who lives on my block who came from Mexico. She just turned 20 and she has 2 kids, and I've been helping her out, like feeding her, giving her clothes and things like that. So, like, how else can I be supportive without getting into trouble with the law or just being me?
Yeah. I think whatever you can do, there's nothing that says in the law that you can't help somebody in need. So it doesn't matter if they're undocumented or they're documented. Bring them to Juntos, we'll organize them.
Wait. So let me be Debbie Downer. So there is a part of the immigration law that says that if you knowingly and willingly transport someone who's undocumented, the undocumented person can be deported, and the U.S. citizen can be fined. However, the key words are knowingly and intentionally transport somebody. And actually, in the 1980s, when there were Central Americans fleeing, Quakers knowingly and willingly transported, let's say, Erika to the hospital. The Quaker worker was put in jail, and the Central American undocumented person was sent back. So, yes, drive that person to Juntos so that Juntos can do whatever. But you all should know that there is a law, whether it's enforced or not in these coasts, not much, that says that if you knowingly and willingly transport an undocumented person, you can go to jail. Now, the law was mainly written for coyotes, so that if you charge her money to get her from Mexico into Texas, and we catch you, we will put you in jail. So that was the reason behind the law. But it can also be used for you, nice person, who's driving your friend, Mexican friend, to Pathmark. Whether it's going to be enforced and how the immigration police is going to know that you've got an undocumented person, I don't know. And by the way, I'm assuming, bad assumption, that maybe your Mexican friend is undocumented. Maybe she's not. So who knows?
She is.
Well,
They'd have to prove you know that.
but now you just said it publicly.
Yeah.
My question kind of comes
Can
to.
you just state your name?
I'm Trey Alexander. I'm with the Institute for Community Justice Through Fight. My question comes around how you were talking earlier about sponsorship. One of the greatest obstacles to those of us that love and have family that are immigrating is finances. When I was married, we sponsored my wife. And we started at $5,000 just to make sure that her green card came and everything was in place. But then you have a lot of family members that want to sponsor their families, but to shoulder the responsibility of the finance is extremely hard. How do we that love them sponsor if we don't necessarily have all the finances, or maybe locate, sponsors within the community, that would be willing to help and not out our family at the same time?
So when someone here wants to sponsor someone there to come here, like you sponsored your wife, you've got to fill out a bunch of forms, and each form has a filing fee. And one of the forms is called an affidavit of support, Immigration Form 864. And you have to say, I'm John Smith, and I live here, and I want to sponsor Mary. She's my wife I left behind. And you have to show that you make more than 125% of the poverty guideline for a family of 2. So you need to show that you earn at least $15,000 or $16,000. And then to this form, you have to attach the tax forms of the last 3 years and a bank statement that says that you have money in the bank. So you might want to do what Erika's father did. You ask him, can you give me $1,000, $1,000? You put it in the bank. And then you ask the bank, can you issue a statement saying that I have $10,000 in the bank? And then you attach that form to the affidavit of support, and then you file all the papers for your wife. This is what I hear some people do. I'm not telling you to do this. But I hear that's how people do this. And so, so you do have to show. And by the way, if your wife then comes over and then she goes to the food stamp office and she says, I need food cash and medical assistance, there's technology links between the food stamp office and the immigration services. Okay, your name is Mary Smith. Your husband who sponsored you is John Smith. Oh, he filed an affidavit of support. go to him for your money. So that affidavit of support almost functions like a third-party contract. You swear to the U.S. government that you're going to take care of this lady, your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your wife, or your husband now, so that if they come over and they fall in distress, you need to be in charge of them for 3 to 5 years. And there's an exception to that, but that's more technical.
Here in the front row.
Just a comment on the question. My name is Grace Luther. I'm an immigrant, and I'm HIV positive, and I'm grateful to fight and I'm sad in a way to be here today because I expected a lot of my immigrant friends to be here, but they're afraid. They couldn't come, as Kimberly says. They said, are we going to go there to be picked up by the immigration police? But there's a lot of information that they missed, which I'll pass to the ones I can find. My question is, when you are filling in your immigration papers, there's some questions you're asked which you don't even know how to answer. Like one of the questions I've had to tackle is, what unique qualities do you have that would make you want to live in America? This is despite the fact that you have attached all the relevant documents. So I thought one of the unique qualities I had was that I was HIV positive and I was ready to undergo clinical trials, and my lawyer said that is not a unique quality. So would you give us any unique qualities you'd suggest for an immigrant applying for papers that you need to pick?
Well, so I mentioned that there's 2 main ways to get a green card. One is to be sponsored by a family member. So when a husband sponsors a wife, that question is irrelevant. The unique quality is I love him and I kiss good. That question is not there. When you are being sponsored by a company, you do have to show 3 things. I have skills that a U.S. citizen in the area doesn't have. The company has money to pay you, and the company can find someone in the area. So I don't know what route you're using, the family route. It sounds like you might be using the employment route to get a green card. But so the employer has to show I need someone to do housekeeping, Chinese cooking, information technology, whatever. I cannot find a U.S. citizen. Ms. So-and-so has the skills that I need, and I have the $10, $20, $50, $1,000 an hour that we pay this post in this region. So it sounds like maybe you're trying to stay here based on an employment sponsorship, and you do have to show that you have a skill that we can't find in the area. So there's thousands of skills, but without knowing more, I can't give more advice. But it sounds like that's the route that you're taking.
The gentleman in the yellow shirt.
My name is Patrick Kosei from Ghana. I really applaud Kimberly for what she's been talking about, immigrants. It's not easy, especially somebody from Ghana. I'm not HIV positive, but I've always around with people with HIV and AIDS. First and foremost, Africans are not ready to come out. Out of the concept. All Africans. Secondly, they link HIV with spirituality and taboo, which is sad. And most of these pastors are making money. Whilst most of these patients are supposed to go to clinical testing and nursing and other places of interest to get support. It's sad that these pastors are telling them lies, what they are not supposed to do. So I really applaud Kim for what she's been talking about. A lot of people will come out to the gossip. Thank you.
Thank you. Back the white shirt.
And I also think
I wanted to get to another voice though.
okay. So I should already know this question right now. So can you speak to the latest marriage equality in PA and its impact on immigration?
Yes. So Pennsylvania up until May 11th was a state that was surrounded by other states that recognized same-sex marriage. And for federal government purpose, if you live in a state that recognizes same-sex marriage, for example, Elisa, you are in New York and you're a U.S. citizen and you marry Erika, who's a foreigner, you can then file the paperwork along with the affidavit of support, and if you do everything right, Erika can then get a green card, but only if you live in a state that recognizes same-sex marriage. On May 11th, about 10 couples sued the governor and said, we want to get married, and the federal court decided that they were right, the governor was wrong. So now in Pennsylvania, a U.S. citizen can sponsor a foreigner. Well, a U.S. citizen can get married to a foreigner, step one, at City Hall and pay your $80 marriage license fee. And then step two is then you fill out all the paperwork that you did for your wife, and then that U.S. citizen can sponsor the foreigner. So the federal government will recognize marriages, same-sex marriages, only if that state that you live in recognizes it. So now Pennsylvania is now like state number 17 or something to recognize same-sex marriage.
My name is Val Soul. I'm with Philly Phi.
Hey, Val.
There are two quick things I wanted to say. First, for Erika Núñez, I wanted to really thank you for saying the thing about the good immigrant versus the bad immigrant, and that really resonates with the work related to HIV. Like, oh, won't someone think of the poor innocent children? Well, what about the adult who got HIV through making choices as an adult and like being human? So I just really like that as one of these intersections. I really want to thank you for that. And for all of you, I would sort of ask, this is the activist event of AIDS Education Month, so what do you recommend that the committed, interested citizen do?
Act up!
That's why we bring it
There you go.
How?
That's why you're playing along. Well, would one of the Erikas like to take that question?
Yeah, I'm trying to just, well, I mean, immediately just being aware, I guess, like, as you're, like, taking the knowledge that you learned today and applying it now on forth, you know, like, if you didn't know about, you know, how prison contracts work, you know, and how it affects undocumented immigrants, but also people of color, but also queer and trans people, you know, and how it affects them. That's really what I always suggest is when you learn something, take it and apply it on forth. But besides that, being involved with also organizations like Juntos, you know, and how you can help with them, and how you can be like a good ally, you know, for the movement.
I need to leave, so I'll just use the public health protocol, which our colleagues at the end will tell you. So the way to end the disease is raise knowledge about the disease, which might change your attitude, which might change your behavior. So continue to come to meetings like this, which will raise your knowledge about immigration, which might change your attitude about immigrants. They're not that bad. Which might change your attitude, behavior, which maybe you'll let one sleep in your basement or your third floor, or help them or transport them to the clinic or the zoo or whatever. You know, get them to relax. So knowledge will result in change attitude, which result in change behavior. So we should just keep learning more about be it AIDS or immigration issues or et cetera. Thanks again, Shamika, for inviting me. I'm sorry I have to run. I have to talk about power.
Can I just add one more thing?
Sure.
I think that one of the things for Juntos is we're an organizing social justice organization, and it's always great to have allies come to our rallies, our marches, to show support. I think it's important because I think it shows that it's not just an immigrant issue, but it's a Philadelphia issue, it's a city issue. We recently did a campaign that was around ICE holds. So one of the things in the country that's called secure communities, it's basically where local police were essentially operating as immigration agents. So if the local police, if you got crossed with the local police for any issue, they could, if you were arrested or if you were picked up and then you were fingerprinted, that information went to ICE. ICE would then call and say, hold that person for 48 hours while we come and interview them. So in Juntos, a lot of our cases were happening because of that intersection. So one, our community did not want to work with police, so I think it's a public safety issue. But two, it was also a situation where police abuse was running rampant in the immigrant community, and people were not stepping up to talk about police abuse. And so we created a campaign with a couple of other ally organizations, and we started doing testimonies at City Hall. We started pressuring the mayor, and through all of that work, in April, the mayor signed an executive order saying that ICE holds would no longer be honored in the city of Philadelphia. But I think a lot of the roles that people can play is that, you know, we talked about this as a Philadelphia issue. And so Philadelphia isn't just the immigrant community, it's everybody. So we welcome anybody to come and support any of our work.
I think that, in my role as a healthcare provider, I guess I see two different ways to think of advocacy. One is I've learned a fair bit about immigration law, not as much as Fernando, but that I regularly come in contact with people who have misinformation. A patient is an undocumented immigrant who had a work-related injury and doesn't know if he or she has any rights around that. And I actually can give enough counseling about the answer to that to be an advocate for that person and connect them to the right resources. And so that is a small piece of individual advocacy around working with people who may not know the rights that they have. And on the other side, I have a degree from Harvard. People listen to me when I talk, so I can also say a lot of things, which they shouldn't. Harvard has nothing to do with it. But society tends to value that, and so as a person with that ability to say something, I can say something and talk about what has happened to some of my patients, or Kim and I can talk about things that happen to our patients that they can't say for themselves safely, and so that is another piece of advocacy about addressing some of the misconceptions or the stories that are incorrect out there in the world for people who can't speak for themselves. And I think we have both of those responsibilities to convey information we have to people who may not have it, but then also to correct in a larger context, in a setting like this or in other places, misconceptions about people. If you want to add anything.
Mr. Williams, are you going to want to add to that, Kim?
Yes. Yeah, so I agree with everything. The only thing I would add is that as much as we find it unpleasant to speak with those who disagree with us, I think we need to involve and educate policymakers, politicians, people who often are on the other side of the table from us, and we need to do it with evidence, and we need to do it with a strong voice. And sometimes you need to use politics to your advantage. And I want to know more about the civil disobedience. I think that sounds fun.
Mr. Williams?
Okay. Thank you. My name is Clifford Williams. I'm board of directors of Philadelphia Fight. And I just want to thank all the panelists. I learned a lot today. And I get this takeaway. I don't know if anybody else does, but Martin Luther King said this best when he said, we didn't all come here on the same ship, but we are all in the same boat. And I get this, it just kept resonating right in my head as each one of you told your stories and, put your input in, and I want to thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you.
I don't know, but
your name?
My Samuel Morales. But we do have the power. The person that are in office, like days we have to vote and stuff like that. We have to pick the person who's going to work for our community. We just don't pick the person that sounds good or anything like that. Because we do have the power to put that person in office to benefit our community. Because our communities, we just vote just to vote, and nothing's been changed. If we put everybody on the same page and start fighting for the communities and put everybody on the same page and put the right persons in offices, I think we can do something.
Yep. Thank you. Sir, in the back?
Yes, the question. My name is Benjamin. Lady on the end. When the woman that came up and told her story, and then the person from the organization told her business, did anything happen to that person?
You would think it should, but because, and I wish Fernando was here because he would be able to give you the legal ease on this, but an individual citizen can say anything they want. That was a volunteer member of a country's organization, and they could say anything they want to anyone they want. And that organization found out about it, but chose to do nothing.
So question, who had their hand? You.
Okay.
In the back?
Yeah.
In the back there? Sorry, I missed you before.
My name is Nicole, and this is more so health related because I work for Resource Human Development, and I work on a program that assists in getting health insurance for people. And I found when working in immigrant communities, and we've worked at NSC, we've worked at CMAC, we've worked at different places, that they weren't aware that if their children were U.S. born, that they could be covered under CHIP and Medicaid, that they could get coverage. And it didn't matter that they were undocumented. And I'm finding that they don't know this. And I think that, being in the field, if there's a way to help get that word out, to let them know that their children can have health insurance, so that they can be covered and, seek attention.
We have a lot of cases in Juntos of families who come in and are looking for support, and we direct them to Puentes, we direct them to different organizations to help them. And there's like a case manager, we're in the United Communities building, who is now bilingual, who works with us, and she helps fill out some of the paperwork. I will say though, about 2.5 years ago, there was a bill that was introduced. There was a slew of anti-immigrant bills that were introduced through the state. And one of them that they were advocating for, and this is something that people fear because they think that this is actually true, but it's not. But they were advocating for having somebody, if you were carrying your child's, if you were carrying somebody else's access card or like welfare card or insurance card, and if it wasn't yours, that it could be a felony, right? And so what winds up happening in immigrant communities is that those cards belong to those children, right? Because you as a parent can't have one. And so that's the fear that I think parents have of just applying, is that they will get in trouble for doing so. And so it's about dispelling it, right? It's about dispelling it, but also realizing that like they are really this close to making it a felony. They're always trying to make it a.
And that's what I see all the time at Puentes is parents who are undocumented, may understand that their child has a right to CHIP, but there is a great discomfort. So the term undocumented is a little problematic because people have a lot of documents. It's just a particular document that they want, right? And so they keep documents very well generally, right? And so they have, but do you want to give the documentation that you do have to a government entity to insure your child, or it's very opaque? What crosstalk between government agencies, is that paperwork going to end up in some other office, and they're going to deport you and your children, who know no other country, and that would be incredibly traumatizing for the child. So the health of the child, you would think, oh, we should sign them up for CHIP, but it's a much more complex question to the parent about what is best for the health of my child, in fearing deportation. So the provision of documents to government agencies is always a huge issue that they deal with. I think people appropriately give a lot of thought to, and that is a big barrier for people signing up for CHIP for their kids.
We have time just for a couple more questions. I know that you had your hand up for a while.
My name is Tigida. I thank the panelists. Something I want everybody to take home today is like immigrant, dealing with African immigrant, because I can only talk on behalf of the African immigrant, have to be very careful, because when immigrant come to you and you ask him, do you have a social security? And the patient tell you, no, I don't have. Do you have ID? You cannot have an ID if you don't have social security. And what happened, the patient go back home, and the next day you won't see them, because they're thinking immigration over there. So that is something you really have to be very careful asking a patient. If you want to help them to have a social security, that is different. But when they come to get care, and you ask them that question, that put them back. So we need to, and then the next thing is Kim and I, like she said, we did a lot. We have a women group who come every month, talk about the statute, and they go out and talk about other people, to other people about HIV testing. So AFAO, the African Family Health Organization, did a lot of testing. Even today, they're not comfortable going to the hospital or somewhere, but they come to AFAO, a family, a couple, come to AFAO and get tested. So I think the HIV patient, we have to respect them. Somebody asked me one day, oh, you're doing all that for HIV, are you positive? I know, I'm affected, because all the people who have HIV, they are my friends, or they are somebody's child or somebody's brother. So I think that we have to learn to respect them and love them because it's sickness like everything. So I, thank the executive director of FIGHT. So for all her work, I've been doing a lot of, workshop here. So thank you so much for your outstanding work.
Becca?
Hi, I'm Becca. I'm an intern over at YHEP. I have recently watched a documentary called Rape in the Fields about undocumented worker women who experience sexual violence in their workplace and don't usually feel that they can report it because of the fear of being deported. And there was recently, I think, some kind of protection that made it so that they could report it. What kind of protections are there for even any kind of violence that's put on people who are afraid to speak? And what does it mean after they report it, now that they are kind of outed, after reporting them?
Well, one thing I can speak on is if you're a victim of a crime in the U.S., you can report a crime to the police, and through that, you can get something called a U visa. So, for example, I actually had a U visa, and I was molested when I was 7 years old. And my parents went to the police, and it took them a long time to get it. I didn't get it until I was 19 years old. But essentially, what it was a temporary work permit for me. That basically was okay, you help us put this person in jail. It doesn't matter if they're a citizen, doesn't matter if they're documented or don't have or a different sort of legal status. But if you help them prosecute a crime, you can get a green card to do that eventually. But the thing about that is there's things like secure communities, which scare people, which break the trust between the police and the people affected, and the people who really need to be, in prison, and those who don't need to be, So.
Sir?
Hi, my name is Roy Hayes. I just really need to say something. I met Kiyoshi in 1987 when I first was diagnosed, and the doctor told me that I was going to die in 6 months. Now I remember Kiyoshi at We the People. He put a T-shirt. I was at an ACT UP meeting, and he told me to put the T-shirt on, and we went to D.C. And he told me that we chained ourselves to the White House friends. And the reason why I said that, Kiyoshi was my mentor. Kiyoshi is the reason why I'm here now, almost 30 years later. And Kiyoshi, and sometimes, when it comes to immigrants or when it comes to the medication, that's all well and good. But I'm that one with the disability. Let's get myself locked up, laying in the street. And sometimes I think it's lost. Sometimes I got mine, even with immigration. I'm here. But I still think we still need it. We still need for people. I just want to say what y'all feel about that. Because sometimes people, though, I understand, a lot of people might not lay in the street. But that's really needed. That worked for years with Dr. Martin King back in the day. But sometimes I think people really forget that we really need to go back to that. And I need to say that. Act up, fight immigration right now. Act up, fight immigration right now.
That might be the best way to end the discussion. So I want to just leave you just with one thought. If you think about the direction that you're facing right now, everybody sitting here for sure, do you know what direction you're facing?
Roughly east.
Yeah, roughly east. And here, what direction are you facing?
Northeast.
Roughly northeast. And what direction are we facing, panel?
I am so bad at
this. Never eat soggy south. No, never eat soggy west.
West. That's right. So just think about that for a few seconds as we settle down and get ready to leave. About what direction that we're facing, and that we're all, as we leave here, are moving forward, and we're moving forward together, whether it's north, south, east, or west. And this is a great panel. It's an honor to moderate you, and we thank you for participating today. There is a lot of leftover candy. I'm going to leave it up at the front if you'd like to help yourselves.